Good afternoon. My name is Ranjita Datta, and today I'm speaking on aspects of protest and community formation, Bhakti in medieval and early modern South Indian history. Let me begin with a story. Sometime around the 11th, 12th century, Ramanuja, a great Sri Vaishnava saint, accompanied with two disciples, traveled from Srirangam, which is in Tamil Nadu, to another place in Tamil Nadu called Tirukottiur in the Tamil region to meet a renowned Acharya, which is loosely translated as a teacher, with the purpose of learning a mantra, which is an esoteric sacred knowledge. Uh, and this mantra was exclusively confined to the Brahmins of the Sri Vaishnava community. We are told that Ramanuja's interaction with the Acharya was a test of his willpower and patience. Despite his vows to utmost secrecy, Ramanuja, disregarding the consequences of censure and castigation, shouted out the closely guarded secret mantra from a temple courtyard so that everybody, irrespective of their caste status, could hear the mantra. Now, this episode, which is recounted in all the Sri Vaishnava hagiographies meaning the biographical texts of the holy saints, all right, uh, has positioned Ramanuja in the modern period as a social reformer. For it is said that despite being a Brahmana, he dared to defy the Brahminical orthodoxy and established social norms. I'm not going to today give a lecture on Ramanuja, who's, of course, a very well known medieval Bhakti saint. But towards the end of the lecture, I would be analyzing this part of his life story to discuss how we have received the idea of protest and dissent in the modern period. The main aim of my lecture is to discuss the history of Bhakti movement in southern India, focusing mostly on the Tamil region. My idea is to tell you all the fact that the ideas of protest, especially against the caste system, so popularly identified with the Bhakti movement, was to be examined very closely, as it is a very, very complex idea. This is not to say that the idea of protest was absent. On the contrary, it is to emphasize in my lecture that protest and dissent were very much a part of the Bhakti, but their trajectory through time and several generations of history complicates them. It is not a straightforward, linear, simplistic, romanticized vision of an alternative social discourse. Uh, it is much more complex than that. It has its own, own contradictions, which is something which I would like to highlight today in my lectures. Because I've just narrated the story, just to clarify who the Sri Vaishnavas are. Sri Vaishnavas are basically a Vaishnava community who are based in southern India, mainly in Tamil Nadu, today's Tamil Nadu, southern Andhra region, and southern Karnataka region. And they are primarily divided into two sects. One is the Vadagalai, which means the northern sects, and which they are supposed to be more Sanskritic and hence conservative in their approach. When I say Sanskritic, they give importance to the Sanskrit Vedas and the Sanskrit language. The second sect is, of course, the Tengalais, which means the southern sect, and they are a little more liberal in their approach because they give importance to the language Tamil and and also give importance to the hymns of the Tamil saints, the Alvars. That is their supposed stated position. All right. And of course, where Ramanuja is concerned, we know that his philosophy of Vishishta Advaita is extremely well known. He lived for, he was born in Sri Perumbudur, and he lived for 120 years, and he died in 1137 AD. This is, of course, a traditional date. Historically, of course, like it happens with all, events in history, most events in history, there is a bit of a controversy over this date. Now, the primary aim of my lecture will be to discuss the history of religious ideas and community formations by examining the ideas of descent in historical context. Religious developments in South India, especially from 11th, 12th century onwards, were characterized by a strong degree of community consciousness. The articulation of this consciousness was discernible in two types of interaction. Within the community itself, where attempts were made to attract as many devotees as possible and adopt an integrative approach. And the second is when the community interacted with other religious traditions. Now, the basis of this community consciousness, that is belonging to a community, was the religious ideology which was articulated in the scriptures by the ideologues of the community. And it so happens that a large number of these ideologues belonged to the upper castes. While on one hand, the interpretations and commentaries of the religious philosophy in these texts or scriptures became the elitist channel for transmission because literacy is not accessible to everybody. On the other hand, rituals, festivals, communal singing of the hymns in the temple represented, the popular transmission of the religion. The development and consolidation of the pilgrimage network further created a spatial and a sacred geography for the community to interact and identify with. And this further strengthened belonging to the community. Now, these religious trends, that I have discussed, have to be seen in a certain historical context. And the historical context is a very long one. It begins with the interaction of the epics and the Puranas and the Tamil folk elements. Now, such an interaction led to the absorption of the epic and the Puranic motifs of stories into the Tamil framework. And this particularly happened by the 7th century AD. Simultaneously, we find that while this kind of an interaction between the Sanskrit and the Tamil was taking place around 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century, we find that a significant idea comes up in a form of a theology, which is the concept of bhakti. Now, derived from the root word bhaj, in Sanskrit, bhakti implies actually participation of God or partaking of the God, loving devotion to a personal God. This personal God is very important. Now, situated in this context of the history of South India, which is also constantly undergoing a change, we find that this idea of bhakti crystallized for the first time into two regional cults, which were focused on the worship of Shiva and Vishnu. Now, we have two sets of very important saints who came up during this period, who sang in Tamil, infused with the idea of bhakti, that is personal devotion to God, here in this case, Shiva or Vishnu, and they sang with great devotion. So the ones who sang, focused on Shiva, with their devotion focused on Shiva, were called the Nayanmars. And those who sang with great devotion, praising Vishnu, were actually called the Alvars. Now, what is crucial about these two sets of saints is that they expressed their devotion, they expressed their love of God in Tamil, not in Sanskrit. So for the first time, we have a vernacular language like Tamil acquiring a sacred status, a status which was equal to Sanskrit, which was, of course, the language of the scriptures till now. Now, characterized by emotional devotionalism, that is, the devotion was full of emotions, full of passion. The saints launched a criticism against the caste hierarchy and used the temple to popularize their philosophies. The hymns also reflected a certain degree of sectarianism, that is, competition with one another, all right, which had a negative, connotation. And particularly the rivalries were not only against each other, but also against the heterodox sects of Jainism and Buddhism. Now, these attitudes that you see in the hymns, these ideas that you see in the hymns, they actually became the precursor for the construction of the Shaiva and Sri Vaishnava communities from 10th century onwards, when both the sects developed their respective philosophies, scriptures, and institutional organizations like the temples and the mathas. Now, interaction with other religious traditions, when it happened, was often full of conflicts, sometimes negotiation, and it made these communities slightly exclusivistic. The hierarchies of caste and ritual status were, definitely, criticized upon, and the inclusivistic attitude actually forged new bonds of community solidarity. Now, we find that it's not only Shaivism and Vaishnavism which came up in this period. Later on in the 11th, 12th century, inspired by Shiva and Vishnu, other communities also came up in different parts of South India, which is Veerashaivism, that is the Lingayats, today's Lingayats in the Karnataka region, Shaiva Siddhanta in the Tamil region, Madhavism or Madhva cult in the, of course, in the Karnataka, region, the cult of Vithoba and Vallabhacharya, Karnataka, Maharashtra region, and so on. They all actually came up in the 14th century. So I would be discussing this trajectory, in greater detail in the course of my lectures. However, as an introduction, my, to how these ideas came up, I would be first talking about the early evolution of the idea of bhakti in the 5th and the 6th centuries. This will be followed by the analysis of the religious processes from the 6th to the 9th century that culminated in the formation of the Puranic sects of Shaivism and Vaishnavism. Then, thirdly, I will be discussing the process of community construction and its ramifications for identity against the context of political patronage from the 9th to the beginning of the 12th century. Fourthly, I will be discussing the developments from the end of the 12th century to the 17th century, which was a period of consolidation of various cults into communities. For example, the cult of Murugan, it became a proper community during this period. Now, this entire period that I'm discussing from the 8th to the, to the 16th, 17th century is a significant period historically in South India. It coincides with the rise of the Cholas, the decline of the Cholas, and finally the establishment of the Vijayanagar Empire in the 14th century, and significantly the integration of Kannada, Telugu, and Tamil linguistic regions. Lastly, I will be taking up the idea of protest and its transmissions through the layers of history. Now, let us take up the first theme, which is the evolution of the ideas of bhakti, which is from the 4th to the 6th century. Now, the beginning of the religious process that culminated later in the medieval period into community consciousness, the beginning of that process can be seen in this period between the 4th and the 6th century. Documented primarily in various texts, which are usually called the Sangam texts, and hence this period is also called the Sangam age. These processes reflected a transition of a new kind of a social and economic structure. The Sangam period was characterized not by monarchy. It was characterized by a society that was based on kinship relations, okay? And these kinship relations were organized into various chiefdoms, and the main source of income for all these chiefdoms was, of course, plundering raids and exactions, and after that, distributing and redistributing what was acquired according to the kind of power people held in the society. Now, hence, the literature, the Sangam literature in this period is full of, stories which are based on two major concepts. One concept is that of love, which is called Agham, and the second is the concept of Puram, which is called war. Because these are chiefdoms and they are depending on plundering raids for income, hence, the literary texts are written with the literary style that reflected both love, which is that of a hero, and of course Puram, that is war. All right. Now, these texts, as I said, reflected a heroic ideology, and an ideal hero was someone who was a perfect warrior and, of course, was a perfect lover. However, there is a systemic contradiction that emerges in this economy and society around 4th, 5th century because of certain forces of transmission. Now, what happens is that since agriculture was limited previously, all right, we find that now gradually there is an agrarian expansion because the population is gradually increasing and the limited agriculture now starts expanding to provide food to the increasing population. Now, where will you get the labor from? Because agriculture needs, a large amount of labor. After all, the kin-based society, the society of chiefdoms, did not have enough labor to, work or to meet the economic requirements. This was the first, a kind of a systemic crisis which took place where there is a certain crisis of the labor. Now, because the labor had a bargaining power now, because they were needed, hence they gradually started asserting themselves against the warrior chieftains, all right, and their voice of protest became stronger. Now, what was this voice of protest? This voice of protest was that warfare is harmful. It disturbs agriculture. We want peace because peace is very, very enabling where agriculture is concerned. Another reason of the protest against the warrior chieftains had started because the warrior chieftains gradually started acquiring land. And hence they had superior rights, and they were alien to the land. And we find that there were superior rights over the land through the status of the warrior chieftains. Now, because the warrior chieftains were rising in status, they had land, they also started giving land grants to the Brahmins. Now, these Brahmins during this period were not exactly priests. They were mostly poets and bards, all right? And hence, they were also a class of non-agriculturists who got the land tilled by the labor or the peasants, all right? Now, the Brahmana households in these landed areas, which was the village, they became the center of, Vedic and Shastric discourse. And this is here we find the rudiments of the beginnings of the caste system coming about. So you have a class of peasants, so-called peasants, who are actually tilling the land, and they are providing food. And in this period, they demand peace, and they turned against those who have right over them and right over land, but they're not actually cultivating the land. And these people are the warrior chieftains and the Brahmins, Brahmins with their households having a domination of the Vedic Shastric discourse. So we find that by the 5th century, because of land grants, land rights, expanding population, a hierarchy starts appearing in the society. All right. And this hierarchy is, of course, reflected in the Sangam texts now. So the texts between the 4th and the 6th century, they do talk of a hero, a heroic ideology. They do stress on the Agam and the Puram, but now they are also propagating the ideas of pacifism, that is peaceful coexistence, which starts now coming up. And this idea of peace and peaceful coexistence becomes an ideology of dissent against the Sangam ideology of warfare and plunder. All right. And this dissent actually slowly becomes hegemonic because it actually helps in the development of the agricultural society. So this is here we have a certain economic and a social change. Now, how does this affect the religious orientation? All right. Now, actually in the Sangam texts before the 5th century, we do not have any reference to any formal religious communities. There are no formal rituals, which are also articulated in the Sangam text, documented in the Sangam texts. The notion of the divine, that is who is a god, before the 5th century was explained in various terms. And what was most stressed upon is that God exists in this earth and it possesses people. So, if someone was possessed or was in a state of emotional agitation, he was considered to be sacred. Further, where would people of the Sangam age go and worship? So here you have whom they considered a god was someone who was possessed. Where would they go and worship? There wasn't exactly a demarcated place to worship, but there was gradually, we find in the text, description of pillared halls, that is halls which have pillars, which are coming out. Probably this is where the beginning of the temples began into a sacred space. Interestingly, these pillared halls were places where people usually gathered. All right. Now, we have in Tamil a very important term called Kovil, Koyin. All right. And Koil actually means today temple. But in the Sangam age, Koil signified house of a chief, palace of a chief, and not a temple. So, so there isn't any temple right now. They're just loose structures like these pillared halls where people come and meet. Now, we have textual descriptions of prayers, some chantings, flowers, lighting of lamps, some kind of a festivity. But you see, the style of worship was not ritualistic. It was rather unstructured. So till now, till the 5th century, you find an unstructured, a loose style of worship. However, we find that by the 5th century, when these kind of economic developments have taken place in terms of hierarchization of society, predominance of agriculture, we find that the religious ideas also started getting standardized, and they started being associated with what we call the Tinai concept. Okay, so I'm going to stop here now.